This is Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Mark Thompson is a huge loser. His show, very bad, weak, soft. But if you're interested in crap and you're a communist, you can go to edge-show.com. I don't recommend it.
You're tuned to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Hey, it's Mark, and welcome. You're in for a treat. You know, for a long time, I've been saying that the Mueller report and all the media air that the Mueller report was getting, the anticipation of it, the speculation about what it might contain, all of that stuff was taking attention from the open corruption and conflict of interest and national security compromises that were clear, I mean, manifestly clear in the Trump administration. But with all the discussion on all the networks and MSNBC and CNN and just obsessing on the Mueller report, these issues weren't given proper attention. That's why Vicky Ward's book, Kushner, Inc., is so great. It details how Jared Kushner got to the place where he and Ivanka are these twin towers of conflict that have critical control over American policy, both abroad and domestic. And this isn't about if you're a Trumpy or you're not a Trumpy, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican. You certainly don't want American foreign policy decided by those who are just trying to enrich themselves and don't really care about the policy beyond that. In any case, when it comes to writing about influence peddling, about high-flying real estate deals, Vicky Ward is the last word. And this book is terrific. So in this episode, we discuss Kushner, Inc., greed, ambition, corruption, the extraordinary story of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
They let guy just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
Vicky Ward joins us. She's a New York Times best-selling author, investigative reporter. She wrote the best-selling book, The Liar's Ball, the extraordinary saga of how one building broke the world's toughest tycoons. And that whole world of high-end real estate in New York, she knows a lot about. Her latest book is Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption. Welcome, Vicky Ward.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, Vicky, I've maintained for a long time that the big story of conflict and corruption is nakedly there in front of us. And in a way, this Mueller investigation has distracted us from that. And that's what I love about your book. It's all about the Kushners and Ivanka. And I want to get into what's happening in government, and I want to get into the transactional nature of everything they do, how it's all about money and about greed. But before I get there, I love how your book lays out these two families, these two people within their families. So can we start with the Kushners and give us a sense of that family?
Yeah, I think so. It's such a good point because you can't really understand Jared and his motivations unless you go back in time and unless you sort of understand the mindset of the Kushner family, which is why I opened the book actually with his grandparents and the nightmarish experiences they faced in Belarus, now Poland, during the Holocaust. They didn't just survive the Holocaust sort of by waiting it out. They had to really fight to survive. And, you know, I mean, there's some harrowing stories that Ray Kushner told before she died. Ray Kushner was Jared's grandmother, of how they had to, she and her family, the ones who were not shot in front of her, had to dig a tunnel to get out of the ghetto they'd been rounded up in. And as they were escaping through it one night into the forest nearby, where they'd heard that there was another group of Jews who were surviving, her brother, his glasses fell off, and that was the last she ever saw of him. He was shot because he couldn't see. And
I stop you right there because, when you do detail this right at the beginning of this Kushner story, it's tough to believe that you can get from this incredibly sympathetic protagonist sort of place to the evil that is then perpetrated by the future generations from the family that you're talking about.
I know. I mean, this is one of the sort of very complicated and tricky things in the book because it's completely understandable why Ray Kushner and Joseph Kushner, who she married, he was one of the Jews surviving in the woods, who she'd known from her hometown. When they came to America, they settled in New Jersey. Like many Holocaust survivors, Joe Kushner becomes a builder because, remember, they couldn't speak the language. It was, no matter how educated you were, building was one of the things you could do. You could do it with your hands. But this mentality of rules are dangerous, you understand it when it applies to the grandparents, because if they had done what they were told to do by the Nazis, they would be dead. So that mentality goes from being something that is completely understandable to something that's really very different when it's passed down a generation. And Charlie Kushner, the youngest son, assumes the mantle, the stewardship of the Kushner family. And he builds this incredibly successful real estate business very, very fast in New Jersey, but sort of without asking his siblings. He sort of decides that he is going to be the protagonist. He is the chosen Kushner. He is going to be the one that is going to use his money to catapult them onto the national stage in America. He has ambitions, great political ambitions. He sees the family as becoming the Jewish Kennedys. The problem is that he starts to cut corners. He thinks, again, that rules are for other people. He's not one of the Kushner family. Explained to me there was a reason he had a check written to get Jared, his eldest son, the golden child, who he pinned all his hopes on, into Harvard. He wasn't going to risk seeing if Jared could or could not get into Harvard on his own. He wasn't going to trust the system. He was going to buy his way. He was going to cheat the system. And what he then tried to do was cheat his siblings. He took money that belonged to them and used it without asking them to pay for all the politicians that he invited to his hometown of Livingston, New Jersey. One of those people was Bibi Netanyahu, who came 4 times to speak. Every single time cost $100,000. And Charles Kushner's siblings, once they started to find out about this, had real problems with it. And brother Murray sued him in a civil dispute. But the civil dispute spilled over and caught the attention of the FBI, of the federal prosecutors, led by one Chris Christie, then the U.S. attorney in New Jersey. And he began to pressure Charlie Kushner, not least because one of the politicians that Charlie Kushner was very, very close to was Jim McGreevey. And both Jim McGreevey and Charlie Kushner had personal secrets. And Chris Christie had secrets that he told Charlie Kushner he would air in public.
And he said there was a legal reason that he could do it. In other words, he could play dirty pool in a legal way and expose these secrets.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that this explains why Charlie Kushner not only was fighting financial charges, but he then went and did something completely horrible, which really caused him to have a problem in front of a jury. He set up his own brother-in-law with a prostitute, filmed the encounter, and sent the video to his own sister. That would count as witness tampering. But, the sordid nature of it really meant that even his sort of friend in my book, his friend and advisor, Alan Hammer, sort of said to him, you can't stand before a jury and tell them what a good person you are after you've done that, Charlie. But what's so interesting about all of this is that the mindset of Charlie's children, especially Charlie's eldest son, Jared, was not that Charlie's going to jail was a consequence of him breaking the law, of him cheating his siblings, of tax fraud, of this terrible witness tampering, the sordid crime. In Jared's mind, all that had happened was that a family argument had improperly spilled over into the public domain, and he blamed Chris Christie. He blamed the government. He thought it was their fault Government was there. Government was the enemy. And I think that it's very important to understand that, not only because it then plays out years later when Jared Kushner fires Chris Christie so very fast from the transition and throws out all the work that Chris Christie and his team have done, throws out the transition books, thereby throwing the transition into complete chaos.
Yes, Chris Christie was leading the transition team for the Trump administration, you say, yeah.
But it's really important to understand Jared's mindset and how important his father and avenging his father would become to him, because once Charlie Kushner went to jail, the burden of fulfilling Charlie Kushner's ambitions for the Kushner family now fell to a very young Jared Kushner. And what I sort of show in the book is that Charlie Kushner all along was the brains controlling his son. Even from jail, you know, Charlie Kushner got PR advice from a PR guru called Howard Rubenstein, who was a well-known fixture in New York. And there was an infamous three-point plan.
This is right after he got out of prison.
Yeah, and so Charlie's plan, which he sort of instructed Jared to carry out, was to sell up on his everything in New Jersey. It wasn't actually Jared doing all of this. He was much too young and inexperienced. But that Jared, as Charlie's representative, would, on behalf of the Kushner companies, buy a trophy building in New York, the infamous 666 Fifth Avenue. The second point of the plan was that Jared would buy a newspaper. He bought the New York Observer, which not only served the purpose of controlling the media to a certain extent, it put Jared into a whole new social orbit with sort of all the power players of New York that he would never have got into as just another real estate developer. And the third part of the plan was for Jared to date someone prominent. And this was all part of a really thought-out rehabilitation plan that was carefully sort of choreographed by Charlie Kushner.
And Jared is sort of the fresh-faced, unencumbered by legal entanglements or convictions kind of face of the family. But Charlie's the puppeteer.
A ruse.
Yeah.
Because, so for example, the building was bought with 97% leverage, $1.8 billion at the top of the market right before the financial crash. So already, you know, very quickly it became a financial disaster. And they were forced into a restructuring. And one of the terms that the lenders had set, precisely because Charlie Kushner was a convicted felon, was that he was not supposed to have anything to do with the running or the management of this building. So when Jared, then in his early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, would hold meetings, restructuring meetings with very angry lenders, he would say to the room, well, I'm now putting my lawyer on speakerphone. And, you know, everyone else in the room knew that the person on speakerphone was not a lawyer. They hadn't brought lawyers with them. It was Charlie Kushner who needed to listen to all the meetings in order to tell his son what to do next. And so I think that it's really important to understand this very tight relationship between father and son, understand how much control Charlie Kushner has over Jared Kushner. I mean, even as Jared got older, after he was married to Ivanka Trump, you know, he would use the fact that Charlie Kushner had sort of gone to jail and was known to be the one with the temper to, you know, as a good cop, bad cop routine, he would say to people, well, you want to play nice with me because otherwise, you know, you'll have to talk to my father. And believe me, you really don't want that.
And by the way, he did have a bad temper. You detail in the book that he, you know, Charlie had like a kind of Jekyll Hyde personality and really could be a handful.
Oh, my goodness. No, Charlie Kushner is absolutely known for his terrible temper. But what was the sort of better kept secret was that Jared could turn nasty. I mean, but to most people, Jared was the calm, polished one, and Charlie was the sort of unhinged person who would shout at you, which is not, of course, dissimilar from the dynamic that Ivanka Trump presented to the world with her father. She was the polished child.
Yeah, she's the coolest head in the room. Yeah.
But again, it's not really an accurate reflection of who's in charge. In both cases, these are two adults, the two young adults, who are very much controlled by their respective fathers.
And I'm glad you mentioned Ivanka, because now, having heard this story, one might say, well, wait a minute. How does Ivanka Trump end up with this family that seems to be so troubled, encumbered by this real estate thing? The father's been in prison, and I just don't understand where these two come together. Now let's talk about Ivanka and how she's coming up and how the two do come together.
Right. So the two, thanks to, Jared's new sort of social prominence as a newspaper owner, he has a sort of glossy sheen about him when he first arrives in New York. You have to remember New York and New Jersey are almost, different worlds. No one in New York really knew much about the Kushners, and nobody held it against him.
So it worked.
And, very soon after he got here, he was introduced to Ivanka Trump at a networking lunch at the Prime Grill restaurant. And, they dated. They obviously, what's so interesting about this couple is how alike they are. But, both groomed by their respective fathers to take on and inherit family real estate businesses. But the Kushner parents, interestingly, during that year that they dated, never even met Ivanka because she was not Jewish. And Cyril Kushner, Jared's mother, in particular, is much more observant even than her husband, really, really frowned upon that. To Jared's credit, actually, they broke up really because his parents asked him to split up with Ivanka. But, a mutual friend, Rupert Murdoch's then wife, Wendy Den Murdoch, reintroduced them on a vacation on a boat. And after that, obviously, Ivanka made it plain that she was willing to convert. And Charlie Kushner remained skeptical. And, I had people in the book saying that he made her conversion as difficult as possible. But she kind of won him over. And I think that, Charlie Kushner was definitely flattered by Ivanka Trump because, and he talked and still talks quite openly about this, she wanted to become a Kushner. After Charlie Kushner had gone to jail, he obviously no longer talked to his brother or sisters. So the Charlie Kushner family unit was very tight. He and Cyril and Jared's two sisters and younger brother Josh spend, it's noticeable, they spend a huge amount of time together. They have business meetings together. They go on holiday together. They spend weekends together. I mean, it's something that people find very remarkable. And for Ivanka
not to
Trump,
interrupt, Vicki, I was just going to say, maybe you're going to get to this, but I was going to just mention that Ivanka's family experience had sort of been non-existent. She hadn't had a tight family like that, right?
Not at all. I mean, really quite neglected by both parents. Ivana was, working most of the time, and then there was this terrible divorce. And, Ivanka was desperate to try and see more of her father after that. But there's this, I have this image in the book of Ivanka arriving at Choate, the boarding school she would attend in Connecticut. And she arrived in a white stretch limo to tour the school, and she got out of it on her own. There was no one with her, and her tour guide was really startled by that. And so you can see why, for her, the Kushners were very, very appealing, this incredibly close family that spent so much time with each other. And Charlie Kushner was very proud of the fact that she sort of wanted to be one of them. And, I think that's why at the wedding, which was very, very religious ceremony.
And what does that mean, very religious?
Well, I think, women danced separately from men. Women were asked there were shawls for them to wear at some point. I think there were names of Holocaust survivors read out. There were a lot of rabbis in attendance. So, people observed that, Charlie Kushner stood up and gave an incredibly emotional speech about how glad he was to welcome Ivanka into the Kushner family. But Donald Trump was clearly out of his element and gave a very perfunctory speech where he just said they're a great couple and sat down. It was, and he would observe.
They're a great couple doing a great job. That's what he usually says, right?
And someone said, one of the guests said it was a terrible speech. It was lame. And he did, I quote him in the book sort of saying he was upset that Ivanka converted. He felt that a Trump shouldn't have to convert to marry anyone. It should be someone, if anyone was going to convert, it should be the other way around. He didn't sort of see why a Trump would have to convert.
Sure. Love that we've established this because this is the foundation on which this relationship was placed and how they gain momentum together. But you can see that he's still got 666 as a problem. In other words, he still has huge problems with debt.
Ticking time bomb, yeah.
Yeah. And then skipping ahead a bit to his interests and her interests as they become played out as Donald Trump ends up on the national stage.
Yes. So this is kind of fascinating. So you have Jared as Donald Trump is campaigning and quite unexpectedly, suddenly it looks like he's going to be the Republican nominee, which is, by the way, only really when Jared and Ivanka start to sort of take his campaign seriously, because it presents each of them with the most fantastic networking opportunity. The Kushners are increasingly desperate to find foreign investment that's going to get them out of this nightmare. They've got the clock ticking, and they've got to find someone who's going to pay $1.4 billion by February of 2019 for a building that one of their partners described it would be worth more if it was just dirt. And it's already become quite clear that no one in America is going to touch this thing with a 50-foot pole.
Yeah, you call it the Tower of Debt in the book,
yes.
don't you?
So for Jared, the campaign gives him a great platform from which to welcome in, suddenly HBJ, with the nickname for one of the Qatari sheikhs, is interested in a way that he certainly wasn't before Donald Trump's campaign gained traction. He starts to express interest in this building. A Chinese insurance firm starts to express interest in this building, all, by the way, for slightly the wrong reasons. And meanwhile, Ivanka Trump, clearly sees this as the most fantastic platform to sell her fashion brand. There she is at the convention, modeling one of her own dresses that everyone is told they can buy the next day. And the fact that these two have zero political experience is sort of remarkably not remarked on. I mean, when you think back to the fact that it was actually Jared and Ivanka who hired, of all people, Paul Manafort to run the campaign, chiefly because they were jealous of Corey Lewandowski, who was no saint, but he wasn't corrupt in the way that Paul Manafort was known to be corrupt. But Jared and Ivanka didn't have the experience, when Paul Manafort was recommended to them by Tom Barrack, who had been one of the people who'd helped Jared with 666 in an earlier restructuring. They didn't have the experience or the political knowledge to know that Manafort was tainted. So you see, them using the campaign as this great platform, but essentially for themselves. And then once we get into the transition, they just go on steroids. I mean, it's more of the same. I mean, there is Jared throwing out Chris Christie, having secret meetings with the Chinese that he'd been courting during the campaign. There is Ivanka flashing a bangle on the interview with 60 Minutes and telling viewers that they can buy it for $10,000. And although, somebody for her fashion line apologized, as somebody in the transition observed to me, well, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, and you can look at that as tacky or horribly crass and commercial, but what you detail in the book is that it's even more than that, that Ivanka and Jared, in addition to, you just said, sort of being sloppy and knowing nothing, I think you call Jared Secretary of Everything, or what did
you?
Yeah.
Well, that's what his nickname was.
Is it Secretary of Everything? Because he was given responsibilities that were associated with all of these extremely sensitive and overwhelming problems in the world. unbridled. I mean, talking about everything from the Middle East to domestic business policy. I mean, he was literally just, Jared was going to be running everything. It was...
Right. Or rather, I think, I mean, the impression certainly Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, initially thought was that Jared took that portfolio. I mean, told him, I'm taking the Middle East. And what obviously Rex Tillerson did not know was that the Kushner family, that Charlie Kushner, behind the scenes, was courting the Middle East. He needed them. You know, this deal with the Chinese fell through, not least because the CEO, the chairman of the insurance company that was in talks with the Kushners, ended up going to jail for life. But, you know, I mean, the Chinese made a ridiculous offer, 3 times worth what anything like what the building was really worth, which attracted the attention of Congress. So then Charlie Kushner was secretly courting rivals of Saudi Arabia, the Qataris. And meanwhile, Jared has taken the Middle East portfolio off of Rex Tillerson's desk. And to sort of the amazement and horror of the far more seasoned diplomats around him, who may not have been aware of just how serious the Kushner family's financial problems really were, which is why, by the way, he couldn't get a security clearance.
Right, and you mentioned the security clearances really were an issue, were they not?
Oh, no, a huge issue, because if somebody comes into government with that kind of debt hanging over them, coupled with their inexperience, and, you know, the other third thing that was cited was the personal conduct. You know, somebody who's clearly willing to take meetings with anyone and then not disclose them on the security clearance forms. You can see why nobody in the security or intelligence agencies thought either Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump should have a security clearance, because they were far too conflicted. They were targets.
Sure.
And so, you know, with Jared then taking over this relationship with all these Middle Eastern leaders, so that you have the State Department and National Security Council completely blind and in the dark as to what he's discussing with them, and pushing for the U.S. official visit, the first U.S. official visit overseas, to be to Saudi Arabia, you know, greatly troubled both General Mattis and the Defense Secretary and Rex Tillerson, you know, who didn't know MBS, the future Crown Prince, very well, but what he did know was deeply troubling. Did know that this was a brutal guy who wasn't that interested in democracy.
Right, far from the campaign that MBS waged to sort of,
yes,
he's not a progressive leader at all.
No. So, and then, of course, Donald Trump, the president, goes to Saudi Arabia. They have this summit that is supposed to be all about cooperation in the Gulf, in the Middle East. And 10 days later, the Saudis make a complete mockery of it by blockading Qatar, where there is an American airbase. Rex Tillerson and James Mattis were in Australia at the time at an annual conference of them and their counterparts. They were completely horrified, because they knew that was our security at stake. And they also knew that the Saudis would never have dared blockade a country where there is an American airbase without getting a green light from the White House. And they knew that the only person who would have given them that green light would have been Jared Kushner. But the president didn't even know there was an airbase actually on Qatar at the time. And Jared had completely taken control and ownership of the Middle East. What they did not know, and obviously would have been triply horrifying to them, was that the Kushner family had just been turned down by the Qataris, that Charles Kushner had met with the finance minister of Qatar and asked him for $1 billion for 666 Fifth Avenue, and the Qataris had turned them down because they thought it was a bad deal.
It's wild.
So then we fast forward 9 months, and MBS starts to drag his feet when he gets asked for more money by President Trump. He gets asked for another $4 billion for help with Syria. And the Qataris see an opportunity and come over to America. And, you know, the timing of what happens is really fascinating and is rightly now under scrutiny by Congress and by other investigators, because within a 2-week period, the U.S. withdraws its support of the blockade of Qatar. And at the same time, Jared Kushner's building, 666 Fifth Avenue, is miraculously bailed out in a deal that makes no sense to anyone in the world of New York real estate, bailed out by a Canadian company whose largest outside shareholder is the government of Qatar. And it's a deal that is basically a 99-year lease where the entirety of it is paid up front, all basically to help the Kushners avoid paying taxes. You know, there wasn't just the loan that was due. There would have been hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of recapture taxes due.
Wow. So again, a 99-year lease was paid all up front for the reasons
all up front. You know, and the deal, I mean, you ask anybody in the world of real estate, it stinks. And rightly, Congress is now talking about investigating it. But you also know that Robert Mueller got wind of a lot of this while he was investigating Russia. And, you know, because of this is really extraneous to that, he passed it out to other offices. So
this might have a legal life beyond the Mueller report.
It certainly will. I mean, I think that this will become actually the biggest issue for the 2020 election. I mean, in a way, Russia was just a distraction.
Yeah, that's...
It's really, my book is really all about Jared Kushner and the Middle East.
I know we have to let you go, but I wonder before you leave if you'll just mention the Comey tie-in, because people associate the firing of James Comey with this sort of convulsive, reflexive act on the part of Donald Trump. But you say that Comey being let go is actually, again, you can trace that back to Jared.
Totally. So what happened, the timing, was that, you know, Jared had not mentioned any of his meetings with foreigners on his security clearance forms. And once the press understood this and started to write about it, Jared then got all worked up in public, which he very rarely does, and lobbied the president in front of a whole group of senior White House staff, including Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon and Don McGahn, and said, you know, I think we need to fire James Comey. By then, James Comey was, as the head of the FBI, he was running the investigation into whether or not there was any collusion with Russia. And Jared made this very impassioned, three-pronged argument in front of a group of them, sort of saying, we have to fire James Comey because the FBI doesn't like him, the Democrats don't like him. And the base will love it. And no one agreed with him. I mean, Steve Bannon had thought that Comey should be fired, but if you were going to do it, it should have been right at the beginning of the administration, that to do it in the middle of an investigation would look, and did look, terrible.
Sure, conspicuous.
Yes. So, you know, again, this was Jared, you know, really crying out for self-preservation in a very naked way.
The book, again, is Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption. There will be a link to get the book on our website, edge-show.com. You can click that link. It'll take you right to Vicky Ward's book and check it out, and you will drink it in. The details are so well researched and take you to places that you never would have imagined. Vicky, just terrific stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
How great is she? As I say, there's a link to her book on our website, edge-show.com. Thanks for being here. We depend on your support and appreciate you subscribing. That's really the way that we stay on top of podcast searches. So like, share, subscribe. I guess that's it. And if you want to make a donation, thank you for those who've stepped up and clicked the PayPal link and left us a little sort of virtual tip. We're at edge-show.com. And if you're going to shop Amazon anyway, go to our website. Anywhere it says Amazon, if you click on that, that's a click-through. We get a little piece of whatever you spend. Thanks for all the ways you support us. And until next time, bye-bye.